Good morning everybody, welcome to Sunday again. Here we go with our cabinet again. It's getting to the point now that we want to get this thing done very quickly, get it over and done with, get it up on the wall so I can get rid of some of the tools that we've got hanging around over there. And so we're going to do things a little quicker now from here on in. We've got to the stage where we're at a point where we're just finishing off all of the construction part of it, getting all the bits and pieces together, and then we're going to assemble it and get it on the wall as quickly as you can. Put a finish on it, of course, as well. So we're going to go through that process, but I don't want to take too much longer with it. I'd like to get on to the next project, which is an exciting one that I've got planned. It's a little cabinet with some drawers in it, and so we'll talk about that at a later date. But one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about today was if you don't have any Gifkins gear and you want to see how a lot of it works, if there's something special that you want to see, by all means send a message and put a message or type a message up on the screen there, and we'll try to answer it by demonstrating the technique that you're after. On the other hand, if you're struggling with a technique and you want me to go over something, just rehash a particular technique that troubles you, please give us a message, and at some stage what I'll do is I'll put a little filler in at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, and show you how to do it. On the other hand, I could build a project with the technique that you're looking for. So please, if you're looking for something and you want something special done, by all means have a little bit of a look at it, and I'll try and answer the best I can. So what we did last week, this is where we got to last week. This is my spare door. This is the one, the dummy door, or the demo door that I showed you how to do little bits and pieces. And that's the problem we have with doing live show. We don't have gluing time. You know, like it takes 12 hours for the glue to cure. So I have to sort of make things beforehand or fix things afterwards and so forth. So this was my dummy door that I actually built. And as you can see, it's quite a nice door. It's got a piece of plastic. All I need to do now is build a cabinet to fit it. So that will be something that we'll work out a little bit later down the track. Now, what I did do was I built or finished off the door for the cabinet. And this is what it looks like. Now remember, we made a blunder with the bead around the inside of the door. I cut it on the inside edge when I didn't really want to do that. All I wanted to do was this technique here. So what I wanted to do was just that. You can see that it's a flat face on the inside of the door, just there, and I've got the bead on the outside. So that's what I wanted to do. But I made the blunder and I've rectified it. And when we look at this one here, I've still got the plastic on this one. You can see that I've rolled it under all the way around. So I've gone all the way around the door, rolled it under there and over there. So we got out of trouble quite easily just by just thinking a little bit outside the box, or inside the door, you might say. So we got that sorted as well. Now this is the point where we start looking at fitting hinges and so forth to the door. Now, I'm not going to do that today. It's going to be something I'll do either very quickly one day. But these are the hinges I'm going to use. I've got it often pays to have a little bit of a look through your box of bits and pieces that you have lying around, instead of going off and buying brand spanking new ones every time. These ones here I've had for quite some time, and I don't know where I've picked them up from, but they just happen to be the right size. So they're going to fit on my door. Of course, they'll be on the inside of the door like so. So just a couple of hinges, then we'll fit those a bit later as well. So now this is where we're up to with the cabinet. Of course, the door is the right size. I've deliberately set it up so that it is exactly the right size. And you can see here at the end here, I'm only halfway through that panel that the top panel above the drawer. So what's going to happen is the drawer has something to close against. Okay, so I've only come halfway down there, and when you open it, you can still see that feature panel in the front there. So the door is going to fit like so. So today we're at a point where what we're going to do is make the drawer. Now, one of the big questions that I get all of the time, I get a common question that I get is, can you cut blind dovetails with the Gifkins jig? Well, the short answer is no, but we do have an answer for it, and this is the answer. You can see this is a drawer out of a little cabinet that I made some time ago, and you can see I've got what appears to be blind dovetails here, even though the front is extended. This is the technique that we use to create blind dovetails. Now, what I could have done is I could have had that flush with the edge of the drawer. In talking to a number of people who are in the cabinet making industry, this seems to become more the go with cabinets that they're building. Reason being is because timber is becoming very, very expensive, and so using a cheaper version of timber to draw build the frame, and then putting a false front on it, tends to be the way most people are going, because it saves timber, saves costs, and so on. And if an error is made, you're only ruining a small piece of timber rather than the whole drawer. So the idea is to minimise your risk, minimise your costs, and so forth. You still can use relatively good timber around the frame, but it doesn't have to be the same quality as the front. Okay, so that could be the outside frame of your cabinet, whichever you're doing. So that's the way around doing dovetails with the Gifkins jig. Through dovetails for the whole frame, and then add a false front. And that's what we're going to do with the drawer. So let's get on to that. Put this out of the way. So our first task, for those of you who have forgotten, is a little bit of maintenance. And the maintenance goes like this. These are my router bits. I'm doing A10. These are my router bits, and all I'm doing is scrubbing them. Now I do this before, you only need to do it once a day, but it only takes 5 minutes. Grab your toothbrush, do both of them, just clean them up. All that sawdust tends to seep into the bearing and create a solid lump inside the bearing. And what I'm doing here is I'm just putting a tiny little bit of oil. Now you only need a drop of oil. You don't need to squirt lots and lots in there. All I'm trying to do is create a slurry inside the bearing. Now this takes a couple of minutes before you start. If you start neglecting it, you're going to be up for a few dollars every time you start things, because things will seize. A little bit of oil on my sleeve. And the router. Pull the collet out. Give it a bit of a clean. Oh, look at that. Just making sure that's nice and clean. If you get a build up in there, you'll tend to find that you can't screw the collet all the way down. And that's 5 minutes maintenance. Okay, so now we're ready to go. Now, let's a bit of wipe the old fingers. Get the oil off. Now, these are my parts. I've gone ahead and got together the bits and pieces for my drawer. Now, in one of them, what's going to happen is I'm going to build a frame, and then I'm going to screw the fascia to it. And you can see in this one here, I've got 2 little screws in there. Okay, so that's how I've kept that in place. Just nice little brass screws, just something that's sort of hidden in the background, sort of thing. So I'm going to do that with this. Problem with this is, if I put it this way, you can see that I don't have much room to get a screwdriver on the inside of the box. Okay, so that's what the drawer is going to look like, but it's really difficult to get a full-size screwdriver in there. You can see the screwdriver is going to be quite a big tool. It's just not going to fit inside there. The same applies if you're trying to drill a hole in it and get countersunk screws. So before you start, in your front panel, drill the holes where you're going to put screws. So I'm going to put 4 screws in here, and they will go, that will be on the inside of my box, and I will screw through here and here. And if I've got them in there beforehand, I'm not struggling to try and drill a couple of holes or do a bit of countersinking in the hole. So it pays to think ahead. Okay. Our next step is, I've already marked the outside of this one and the bottom. And as you can see, I'm a little bit closer to the top. I've allowed for the bottom. I've got to put a base in there, so I've allowed a little bit of space in the bottom there for the base, so that when I cut the trench in there, I've got room to actually get a small offset screwdriver in there to do the screws up. And these are my, that's the front piece. This is the back piece. Just need to sort of okay, so I want it looking like that, and that'll be the outside at the back. So face side mark. The same with my 2 ends. Now they're just, as you can see, I don't actually need a lot of room. If you have a look at the cabinet, I'll just get the cabinet over here. If you have a look at the cabinet, you can actually see that there isn't a lot of space. So you need to have your pieces of timber fitting into the space. Okay, so that's what I've got happening there. And of course, this one will be the same. Okay, so that'll fit in there. All right, so let's cut some joints. I'll just have a quick drink. So I always cut my dovetails first, so this is going to be a little session. So if you haven't used the jig before, this is what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the dovetails in the end pieces, which is what you do with a drawer. As I said before, your side pieces have got the dovetails in it. You need to have that there so that if you're pulling and pushing a drawer, it's going to lock together rather than actually pull apart. If you have the pins on there, you can actually pull the drawer off, the front off the drawer. So always when you're using let's make sure that's nice and tight. Adjust my height. Now adjusting my height, always use your opposing piece of material. So this is I'm going to cut the small ones first. So I use my opposing piece of material. I don't want it to stick through too much. as you can see, I haven't got a very thick piece of material, so it doesn't, you don't want it a whole heap thick. It's just a bit too high. There we go. Okay, so what I've got here is I've just got a tiny, tiny little trying to find the right word now, just a little bit above the piece of timber, and of course my template. Now before I started this morning, I did a test joint. Now my test joint, it's only offcuts from the material that I'm using. What I've done is I built this test joint, and the test joint is actually a spot on perfect joint. It's actually a little too perfect. I wanted a little bit more snug than that. It slides in just beautifully. You can see how it fits. It just fits together really, really nicely. I don't want it, and to me that it just needs to be that tiny little bit more snug, right? So what I'm going to do is I've taken a shim out. I'm going to give it a try and see how we go. And part of that's because the material that I tested it on is a little bit thicker than the piece of material that I'm actually cutting. So we'll see how it goes. Doesn't always work, but we'll soon see. Now, lining up. What I've done here is I've just lined up on the outside edge of the pins. Just making sure that's spot on. Now, luckily, the width of, or the height of the box is a perfect fit for what happens on the jig. So, well, got out of that quite easily. Even if it wasn't, we could still adjust it enough to be able to set things up quite nicely. Now, as I always say, and this is a mantra that I sort of live by when I'm using my jigs. Face side mark tells you a number of things. This is for people who have not been doing this before. Face side mark tells you the outside of the box. It tells you the bottom of the box. It tells you the top of the box. Right? Now, you choose the outside depending on your colour, what patterning the grain gives you, and all sorts of various things, and you will have your own reasons why. But the important thing to remember is that you have the bottom signified and the top and the outside. So when you fit into the jig, you make sure that the first cut for every board, so the first cut for this board, the first cut for this board is going to be like this. So the face side mark is out and pointing at my red stop. That'll be the first cut for every board. Of course, when we cut it out and do the other side, you're going to see that it turns over and it's pointing at the black one. But the first cut, and I live by this all the time, first cut is always that fashion. Okay, so let's cut. So earmuffs on. Just make sure everything's turned on. Where's my earmuffs? Okay, so here we go. So you'll notice that when I pushed in there, I pushed in on the right hand side. So I went in on the right hand side. Come in on that one. I went in on the right hand side of the pin, and then I came out on the left hand side. So I went in all the way to the back and then came all the way out to the front. And then I did a couple of back and forth cuts. Now we just rotate like so. Face side mark is still pointing out. Just pop it straight back in exactly where it was. If you don't follow this procedure, more than likely, if your measurements are out, because everything's done by eye, more than likely what will happen is you'll end up with a little gap or a little step at the top and the bottom of your parts, because as you saw, we did everything by eye. I didn't do anything by measuring and marking or anything like that. The jig will actually do it for you. So the idea is to make sure that you follow that procedure so that you get an even layout right across your whole of your joint. Okay. Ears on. And so we have our dovetails done. You can see both my boards. And now it's a matter of doing the two front and back panels. Okay. I already cleaned up the route a bit, so we're all good with that. And again, same procedure, use your opposing piece of material. Just make sure you've got no sawdust underneath. Nice and clean. Come up tiniest little bit. I could use the winder, but okay, so that's perfect. And now remember, the same procedure applies here. We don't need, we started out with our material there. We don't need, excuse me a sec. We don't need to change anything. What we do is we turn the jig around, leave everything set up exactly the way it should be, and we drop that in like so. Now, the thing that I've got to do is make sure that my face side mark is pointing at my red stop. That's my first cut. So we set that in like so. Incidentally, one of the things that's very important is to make sure that your pieces of timber are parallel all the way along the piece, and they're perfectly square on the ends when you set them up before you start. Okay. Now this one, what you'll see here is we've got a a bigger distance between the pins with the pin side. So therefore, if I cut straight through into there, I would have a little bit of tear out occurring on the joint, and that happens on the inside, or the outside of the box, of course, on this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut across the face first and take a little bit off there, just to give it a bit of relief, and then I'll just take out the rest of the material straight after that. So always right to left, and then we go from there. Okay. Ears on. Okay, so here's the litmus test, just to see how it fits. I think that worked very well. That's a little better fit than my test joint. So you can see, quite nice. I've got exposed ends. I can just sand those off and everything will fit nicely. My little piece of timber, my front piece of timber, this bit here, is actually 2 millimeters longer than the space that I've got to work with, so I can trim off that end without a drama. So let's pull it apart, put it back to where it was. Now remember, make sure your face side marker's out, and then we'll get do a recut. Just have a little drink beforehand. Remember to do this when you've set up. So I've got my piece of timber in there. You'll see where I have my hands. I've got them resting on the bench, right? I'm only moving a small amount. It doesn't have to be very far at all. So you don't have to have a whole lot of movement in your body or in your arms or anything like that. This is designed to give you a lot more control. So hold it like so. When you're using the jig, over the top, look over the top. Now, if you're in a position where you can't see over the top, then it's probably a good idea to lower your table, get it a bit smaller. I've heard of a few people who actually turn it around and use it this way and pull it towards themselves. You saw what happens here. You've got all of this stuff, and if something comes off there or something breaks off here, it's going to fly straight back at you and hit you. And if you're as a safety thing, I would prefer, and I would advise people, when you're using the jig, is have it between you and the router bit and push it away from yourself rather than turning it around and having it coming towards yourself. Okay, so people say, oh yeah, but I can't see. eventually it gets to the stage where if you use it often enough, you're going to find that you really don't need to be looking at it all the time. So think about that when you're using it. So again, face side mark out, pointing at my red stop, and that's not correct. Okay, so I'll have to turn that over. As you can see, check, make sure it's all in the right way. Okay, so ears on again. As you can see, it doesn't take a lot of time to cut your joints. It's you can take your time with a little bit, unless of course you're cutting a 20 or 30th box and you need to get it done very quickly. But if you're just doing one off, take your time with it. It doesn't have to be a race. And what did I do there? I've put that on back front. It's better. So that didn't take much to fit at all. And so there I have my drawer frame, and as you can see, I've got the holes in there. I can use a short screwdriver to put some screws in to put the front on, so that will fit straight into my cabinet. Now I don't think it will fit because I think it's a bit too long at this stage, but what I'll need to do is actually make a base for it. So as you can see, it sort of fits. And once I take, as I said before, the length of this from along here is actually a little bit longer, so that when I do take it off, I've got a nice snug fit. Okay, so that's going to fit in like so. So there's the frame. What I need to do now is put a base in it. So my next task is to put some tape on it. Now this is just safety reasons. Now the tape I'm using here, fibre reinforced tape. Part of the reason I use that is so that it doesn't stretch. You'll find that sometimes with masking tape, it'll tear, won't hold very well, or you'll end up, if your joints are just a tiny little bit loose and you use electrical tape, you'll find that the electrical tape will stretch and the box won't go together well. So I'm finished with the jig, so I can put that back in the cupboard. rid of that as well, don't need that either. And what I do need is my rebate bit, my rebate cutter. Now that's the router bit I'm going to use to cut the trench. If you're making little boxes like this, where you've got a very thin frame, it's very important that you make sure that if you're using that router bit, that this is thick enough to be able to take it and have a little bit of excess in there to support the base when you put it in, because you don't want it poking a hole through the side of the case. All right, so my minimum thickness for that sort of stuff is 7mm. Okay, let's go here. I'm going to take 2 cuts to get this done. What I'm doing is I'm going to take off the little bearing and I'm going to put on the bigger, whoop, gee, got away on me there. Take off the little bearing which comes with the router bit, and we sell a 19mm bearing that fits on. And what that does, it reduces my depth of cut to 1.5mm. Okay, so it's not taking so much out. What it does, it starts the cut for my trench around the inside, and I want that to be a nice clean cut. So I'll do it in 2 passes. So my first pass will be rotate around, and then we'll go from there. So now setting the height. Where I have the screw holes, as you can see, if you look at this, you can see that I'm a little bit shorter distance from there to there than it is from there to there. That's allowed for that base. So what I want is at least 5mm of material on the bottom. Because it's a draw, I don't want 10mm because I'm not going to put feet on it. All I'm going to do is cut it 5mm up. So I'll measure from the bottom of my router bit to my bench, set the height at 5mm. My router's okay, spot on, 5 went straight there, so that's quite good. So all I'm going to do now is rotate around there. Now the thing about this is you normally will go with the rotation, against the rotation of router bit. That's the normal technique. So what I want to do this time is I'm going to go against with the rotation of the router bit, not against it like your normal technique, so that I can get a nice clean cut to start with. And because I'm only cutting 1.5 mm, it will be okay. So it won't go anywhere with it. So let's have a go at that. Locked in. Make sure it's the bottom. Okay, so that's my bottom edge. And rotate around. As you can see, I don't start the router until I've got the box over the top of the router bit, and I don't shift this until that stops. Okay, so again, another safety thing that you need to follow. So all I want to do now is cut my full depth. You can see I've got this, need a bit of light in there. You can see I've got a nice little trench all the way along there, and it's a clean trench. Okay. Now the way to tell whether you're going with the router bit or against it is if it tries to pull it out of your hand, it's trying to go with the rotation. And we generally push against that. Okay, so we take off the little bearing. the big bearing I should say. Put the little one back on. And very important, you go against the rotation of the router bit when you're using this. I know a lot of you have seen or heard all this before, but it doesn't hurt to go over the top of it. Go over it again. Okay, all turned on. A lovely clean trench. Let's get this out of the way. Now it's time to measure up for the base. Now the base material that I have is a piece of 4mm silky oak. Now it's what I have available at the moment. It's 4mm, which is the same thickness as my trench. Okay, so it's going to fit in there. All I need to do is cut it to size. Now, cutting it to size, the important thing to remember here when you're cutting to size, I need to get a different ruler because that one's not long enough. The important thing to remember when you're cutting to size is to make sure you've got a little bit of space around the box. So, sit your ruler in there and you can see it's 310mm. Because I've got a 5mm gap, and you can see that when I put the measurement there, you can see that it's exactly 5mm. Because I've got 5mm, if I cut it to 315mm, I would have a perfect fit. Now, in woodwork, most of the time a perfect fit is what we're looking for, but not when we're putting bases in. What we need to do is make sure we've got a little space in there so that we've got a gap around the space. So we're going to make that 314mm. So I'm only going to take a millimetre off. I better write that on something because my memory will evade me. So 314mm by, and across this way here we have 73. So 73 and 4 is 77. So 77mm wide. Okay, so write it on somewhere. I've written it on here because I'm going to screw a piece over the top of it. It's not going to interfere with anything that I'm doing, and I probably don't have to take it off either. So over to my drop saw, and as you can see, it's quite a large piece of material. It's something that I run through the drum sander quite regularly. I'll get a wide piece of material and cut it to size. So that's what we've done at the moment. Now, 314. There's my measurement. Again, going to use my laser. I love my drop saw. The laser actually gives me a whole heap of accuracy. Okay, so there's my 314. Now, because this is a draw, I'm going to use that bit there. You can see that it's a little bit rough. It's got a straight edge, but it's the coloration's not really good. This is not so bad, so I can use that in a box where it's visible. In this one, it's not going to be that case. So 77 wide. trim off that little bit on the end. And the thing that I haven't done before the show was to set up my little sander so that I could do the corners. So let's go back to our bench. So this is the bit that's going to fit into there. What I need to do is I need to round over the corners. So a little bit of sandpaper first, just to tidy up the edges. A little piece of 180. Okay, now rounding over the edges. This is going to be a bit of fun because I'm going to have to go and get the little drum sander that I use and bring it into the workshop here. It won't take 2 seconds. So just talk amongst yourself for 2 seconds and I will just, I'll come and get my sander. Plug myself in here, just get it sorted. It's the beauty of having things on wheels is it's just a matter of shifting around. Like so. There we go. So everything's on. So as you can see, quite a nice little rounded edges. Only takes a couple of seconds to do that. I'll just shift this out of the way so that Pam can get around. Okay, so as you can see, when you have all the gear set up, generally won't take so long. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pull it apart, fit my base in. You see I support when I pull things apart. And my base should fit in there. So if you're making small boxes for little things, this is always a nice way. As you can see, that just clipped in nice quietly, nice and neatly. And as you can see, we now have a neat little bottom in the box as well. So what I'll do is I'll glue that together and have that ready to fit the face on it next week. So we're going to fit the face on next week, and we'll also hinge the the door. So we're going to put the hinges on the door. The other thing I'm going to do during the week, actually I might even do it now. These two panels, I'll put this aside because then I've got to glue that together. What I want to do, and you'll probably have noticed it when you saw the first box that I made. I want to put a top panel on here and a bottom panel. Now I've cut the pieces of timber, that's what they look like, and one will go on top. Just got to make sure I get it in the right place, like so. And the other one will go, this one's sorted, on the bottom. It just tidies up the box and makes it look just that little bit nicer, right? It also gives me, on the back, it gives me a little bit more room to be able to screw on the French hook, which is going to fit. I'm going to put one there and I'm going to put another one on the bottom. It's another technique of using the French hook. So it gives me a little bit more room to put the screws in. Okay, so that's what happened there. But the thing that I've got here, when you look down here, it's very square. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chamfer off the front edge and the two sides, just to give it a little bit of little bit more character. Now, I don't want to go too far because when we fit the door on, or actually when we fit the drawer front on, the drawer front will come out to about that far. Okay, so it comes out a reasonable sort of a distance. So I don't want to take too much off. If I take too much off, the chamfer will be underneath the drawer base. So all I want, if you have a look up here, you can see I've got a little mark there. So that's the distance I'm going to chamfer in, so that I've got a little step just on the outside edge of that. Okay, so that's what's going to happen with that and the top one. So I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to do that now. You could use, if you don't have a chamfer bit, you could use a plane, mark it and cut it, or plane it off. One of the problems you have with the plane is you're going to be planing along end grain there, and you may end up chipping off. Now that could be a problem as well with the chamfer bit, but we'll see how that goes. So make a spanner. Okay, this router bit is a router bit that comes in our kit. You can purchase that from us if you feel up to it. Now what I wanted, I've got 5mm there, so I'm going to mark that on the end, so I've got something. I had a pencil. That's my step. And once I get that set up, again using my finger gauge, we don't need to always use a ruler to do our set. I've put it on the wrong end. Get my mark. Easier up this end. Okay. So when I set up here, I'm just setting up. Can you see that? Okay, so that's going to give me a pretty good cut. Okay. I've got to cut this side and I've got to cut that side. Okay, so ears on everybody. Now, as you can see, that's quite a nice little chamfer on those. It's nice and clean, nice and neat. It's not very big. It's easy enough to do with the chamfer bit. And when we put the cabinet back on them, I'll just glue and screw that in place. And as you can see, it's added a nice little feature around the door. And when we fit the door on there, or this is going to be the drawer, of course, you'll see the door will fit up under there, but it'll be the same as this. You can see that it's just stepped out a little bit away from the door, so it's not actually impeding, and it gives you that little feature. So it's going to look quite nice when it's done. So that'll go up there, of course, and then the drawer will fit in there. Okay, so that's where we'll stop today. Right on time. So next week, during the week, what I'll do is I'll dress everything up, get everything ready for assembly, and we'll try and make an effort next week to get everything assembled and put together. That'll mean that that'll be the front of the drawer will get screwed in place, the hinges will be fitted to the doors, and the top and bottom panel will be fitted. And we'll also, during the week, what I'll do is I'll make the French hooks so that I've got them already made up and ready to fit as well. So if I fit all of that, it means next week we've got a completed cabinet that needs to just be dressed and then hung on the wall. So we'll try and do that next week. So I hope you got something out of that this week. If you do, remember what I said to you right at the beginning of the show. If you have something that you want me to go over for you and to rehash, by all means, send me some messages. I'll have a read of the messages a little bit later, and I'll attend to your questions later. So give it a go. Now, if you're new to the show, please subscribe, and we'll give you a little reminder every week. You'll get one on Instagram if you go to our Instagram page, and you'll also get one on YouTube. And we'll get back to you next week. So stay safe, everybody, and I hope you all have a really good weekend. I hope you've had a good weekend so far, and I'll catch you all next week.